and welcome to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela and today's story is so full of love, murder, betrayal, deceit, mayhem that I'm super surprised they haven't already made a Hollywood movie about it. Or then again, maybe they have and I just missed it, which of course is also entirely possible. Now, to understand today's story, there's a bit of background information that we're going to have to go through just for a bit of context. But don't worry, we're not going to focus too much on all the boring background stuff because if you're like me, you just like to skip the boring stuff and get straight to the excitement. So, to begin with, as I kind of tried to explain in my Who Are the Diadochoi video, after Alexander the Great died, there was a little bit of contention about who was going to be in charge next because good old Alex hadn't made it clear about who the next in line was. Which essentially means we were left with this group of guys that were just squabbling over different parts of the empire. And to understand today's video, there's the names of two of these guys that we have to know. The first is Ptolemy II, who was the son of Ptolemy I. Ptolemy I is the guy who ended up being in charge of Egypt. The second guy we need to know about is Antiochus II, who is not to be confused with Antiochus I, who was his father. Antiochus II was also the grandson of Seleucus, who was one of the original Diadochoi who ended up controlling Alexander's territories in the east. But anyway, let's not get too caught up in who was the first and who was the second, because if we start focusing on that, it's just gonna get way too confusing. And look, honestly, sometimes even the ancient authors ended up confusing themselves, so we're not really being lazy, we're just being practical. Alright, so let's recap. Ptolemy II was in charge of the Ptolemy Dynasty in Egypt, and Antiochus II was in charge of the Seleucid Empire in the east, which included areas such as Iran and Syria. Now, these two guys were at war. Why? Well, because their fathers had been at war, and everybody wanted to be the next Alexander and control all of the land. But eventually the two of them did get sick of fighting and they're like, do you know what? Maybe we should try and give peace a go. Let's see if we can come up with a sort of agreement or a treaty or something like that. And they did reach an agreement. It was decided that Antiochus would marry Berenice, who was the daughter of Ptolemy. This way, a grandchild of Ptolemy would eventually end up on the throne of the Seleucid Empire. And then this hopefully would be able to secure a more lasting peace between the two previously warring kingdoms, empires, dynasties. Sounds like a good plan, right? There was just one teensy-tiny little problem. Antiochus was already married to this woman called Laodice, and they already had a child or two or three together. So what's the solution? Well, Antiochus sold some land to Laodice so she could be financially secure and have a nice life. I say sold because this land was essentially the size of like Tasmania or something and included villagers, peasants, like the humans, not the birds, taxes, farms, and essentially she had to pay like the equivalent of $10 for it. But anyway, that was our solution. Antiochus divorced Laodice, gave her alimony, and then he was free to marry Berenice. This way, any children that Antiochus and Berenice have in the future will be set to inherit the throne. Problem solved. Peace between the two empires at last. The fact that Berenice also came with a huge dowry no doubt helped to sweeten the deal. But then Ptolemy goes and dies. And Antiochus realizes that with Ptolemy dead, there was really no reason to stay married to Berenice. So he decides to divorce Berenice and that way he can get back together with Laodice. And just like that, we're back at the beginning of our story. Except at this point, Laodice wasn't 100% convinced that her sons were secure in inheriting their father's throne. Because once Berenice's baby grew up, there was nothing that would stop him from also making a claim to the throne. And so it's decided by Laodice that Berenice and her baby
must die.
Now, I'll just quickly interject here to say that some sources actually say that it was Laodice's grown-up son who was behind all the plotting that's about to happen next. However, even those sources agree that Laodice was egging her sons on. And now back to our story. Berenice gets wind of the plot and she begs for help, and the city she's staying in feels sorry for her and they do agree to try and protect her. She had a guard of Gaelic warriors, a fortified citadel was appointed as her residence, and the people, mind you these were Antiochus's subjects, but the people also swore allegiance to her. But it was all too little too late, and in the middle of the night the assassins snuck into the citadel, got into the nursery and killed her baby. Now, poor Berenice didn't even straight away know that her baby had been murdered, but she started to get suspicious because when she was asked to see her baby, they kept coming up with excuses. And it was also around this time that the ministers who were loyal to Laodice and had helped organize the assassination of the baby started getting cold feet and were like, crap, maybe we shouldn't have killed that baby. And so they found another baby. Probably stole it off some poor peasant woman or something, but they were like, look, see, here's your baby, all good, nothing to see here. But Berenice realizes that that is not her baby, and that also means that she's in deep trouble. So she sends a message to her brother, who is also conveniently named Ptolemy, and asks him for help. Her brother receives the message and he essentially just packs his bags and rushes off to save her. He barely even takes any time to rally any troops. I mean, he wasn't looking to start a war, he just wanted to go and save his sister, and possibly any claim that she may have had to the Seleucid throne. Unfortunately for Ptolemy, somewhere between Berenice sending off for help and him actually arriving in the city, Berenice gets assassinated. And it's not because those around her willingly let her get assassinated. Apparently some of her ladies in waiting even died trying to protect her. But it didn't help and she was killed. But then, as with the assassination of her baby, the people who had killed her were like, oh, crap, maybe we shouldn't have done that because the common people really seem to have liked her. So they place another woman in Berenice's bed and just kind of pretend that she's all okay and just recovering from the wounds she received during the assassination attempt. And this ruse was kept up until her brother arrived. And apparently in some sources her brother did even keep up the ruse once he had arrived and realized she was dead, because he needed to buy some time so he could rally some troops and get his vengeance or whatever. So he sends messages out to all these other cities asking them to send men to come and help defend his sister. Because of course they're still more likely to come and help somebody who was alive and still had the potential to make a claim to the Seleucid throne than somebody who was already dead and couldn't really do much. But no matter what happened next, it was the end for poor Berenice. But what about Antiochus and Laodice? Because finally they could reunite after they had been so cruelly forced to separate. Well, apparently Laodice had some trust issues now, and she wasn't 100% convinced that Antiochus wouldn't pull a similar stunt and once again cast her aside and thereby cast aside her son's claim to the throne. So what did she do? She had him poisoned. No more Antiochus meant no chance of any future sons that had the potential to disinherit her sons. The end. Now before I end this video, let's just clarify that there is no way that this story can 100% be confirmed. And there are also many different versions of exactly who did what and when what happened. I mean, it's quite possible that certain parts of the stories, depending on who's telling them, were embellished to make certain people appear in a certain light. So parts of the story could be quite heavily politically motivated, and it's even possible that Laodice didn't kill Antiochus and that the two of them really were in love. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Either way, it makes for a pretty interesting story. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you for joining me, and maybe consider subscribing because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.